All right, I think we are ready to get things started here. I'm personally very excited about this. This is going to be an epic event. We appreciate you guys jumping in and joining us. I think we'll get things rolling here. My name is Devin Rang, Vice President of Business Development here at Spinutech, and I will be moderating today's webinar. For those of you who don't know, Spinutech is a full-service web design and digital marketing agency with offices in Cedar Falls and Des Moines, Iowa, Chicago, Denver, and Tampa. And we've got team members, remote team members in more than 20 states across the US. Our crew of more than 160 team members helps clients build unique customer experiences to grow traffic, convert leads, and track their entire marketing funnel in one spot. So whether you are a current partner of ours or a meeting for the first time, we hope you learned something today and look forward to continuing the conversation beyond today's discussion. All right, now that we've got the elevator speech out of the way, let's dive in. Today, we have a special presenter joining us today from Basis Technologies. For those of you that don't know, Basis is a cloud-based workflow automation and business intelligence software platform for marketing and advertising. I personally have worked with these folks for over 10 years and would give them a ringing recommendation. We've been proud to partner with Basis on the programmatic display side of our business for years now, and we really view them as a leading voice in the digital marketing industry when it comes to automation and intelligence. Noor Nasir is the Vice President of Media Innovations and Technology at Basis, and she'll be presenting alongside Brandon Beaver, who is our Senior Web Analyst here on the Spinutech team based out of Colorado. Together, the two of them are going to talk about looking into the future without third-party cookies. As we look at this, third-party cookies have been a tool of the marketing trade for years. Many of you are probably aware of that, but the end is near. And today, Noor and Brandon will look at how we got here, what a cookieless future means, and what some advertising alternatives are coming on the horizon. You'll notice the chat function is disabled for today, but we are monitoring the Q&A. So feel free as Noor and Brandon are running through stuff, go ahead and throw your questions in there. And then as Noor and Brandon finish up, we'll actually start rapid firing those questions at them as we see fit. So without further ado, subtle drum roll, please. Ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right in. Noor, why don't you kick us off?
Fantastic. Thanks for the intro there, Devin. And thanks to everyone for joining us this late morning or afternoon, depending upon where you're coming from. I imagine there's a lot of Midwest folks joining us. So we're here to talk about this cookieless future, this impending cookieless future that we've been talking about for quite some time now. So in order to kick off this conversation, for those who are not as close to the subject matter material, or you're not the one who's personally responsible for figuring out what the future of a world without cookies looks like, I want to start from a place that I think a lot of people can relate to, which is if you use the internet, then you've seen visuals like this one, right? These little prompts that come up to us every time you visit a new website that's owned by somebody, some brand or business. And they are not dissimilar from the ones we're seeing in this moment. We store cookies, we share data with third parties, and so on and so forth. And this is this new age of a consent model that's been around for roughly 2-ish years and aligning with some new regulation that we in the United States and even beyond the scope of the US are responsible for. And as far as what this has to do with marketers, I imagine if you're on this call, you have some marketing function that's a part of what you do, or there's a cookie related consideration for people who work on your team or work with you. So this is really taking it way back for anyone who has that lesser familiarity with what makes third-party cookies so attractive and why there's so much heat or consideration for a world in which we won't have cookies. Why are we so concerned? It's because there's this really attractive model that cookies have offered us from a tactic perspective for paid media campaigns. And so it looks very similar to this little workflow we see right here, where there is a prospective customer. And if that prospective customer visits our website, and web traffic is something we're all very interested in, right? You want to see in GA or whatever analytics tool you're using, who is coming, who are these people? And if they leave, you want to see if you can re-engage with them. And if you set up these third-party cookies, they enable you to not just track people on your site, but rather as they surf the web and go elsewhere. So you're kind of stalking might seem like an aggressive or not the right type of word, but you're basically following them around, and you can start hitting them with ads. And then subsequently, if they so choose, after hitting them a certain number of times with those ads, if they want to engage, they can. And ultimately, the dream goal is to get some sort of conversion. So obviously, third-party cookies are not the only way in which we think about data, but they are a major source of accessible data collection. And as far as data collection overall and how important that is to digital marketers and marketers at large, a lot of money is being spent in data aggregation. So this is a reflection of a Epsilon study that was put together in 2021, and they found that $8.7 billion was spent in the US last year, and this was, last year relative to 2021, on data activation, and that was up 10% from the previous year, being 2020. And data activation is a reflection of data that we are actively using for marketing and paid media campaigns. So just an interesting stat to take a quick look at as we reflect on the fact that third-party cookies are a chunk of what that data is correlated with. But there are many other types of data utilization that is a part of the practice of digital marketing. So as far as knowing that everything isn't strictly and exclusively correlated with third-party cookies, there are other things that we also are concerned about in this larger landscape when it comes to thinking about identity, because that's really what's at the center of all of this. When we think about this cookieless future, what is our core concern? Why are we concerned about them going away? Our fear is around not being able to identify individuals on the internet with precision, because that precision is what enables any marketer, whether you work for an agency or you're on the client side or whatever side you're coming from to this conversation, you want to be able to reach the right person with the right message at the right time. And third-party cookies have been a big part of that, but there are other types of data and or identity that we also need to reflect on. And as far as there being some sort of crumbling in our ability to target in the way that we have historically been able to. So a couple of quick pointers here. Number one, a point that I've mentioned again and again is this loss of third-party cookies. A little bit more about that. The expectation is that the vast majority of third-party cookies will no longer be available to us to access for paid media targeting and or attribution purposes by the end of 2024. And the reason why that is highlighted is because this is probably the third or fourth time that number has been changed. We'll talk more about why that not number, but rather year has been modified again and again in just a little bit. But that's a big part of this conversation. But what else is a part of this identity or precision crisis that we're also concerned about? And that second piece is that there are other types of identifiers, or what we refer to as probabilistic identifiers, that are also expected to be lost, and or some of them have already been lost. And fingerprinting is an example of that, where we are able to gather data on individuals in ways that are similar to cookies, but distinct and differentiated in some ways based on their web-based behaviors. Then there's also the erosion of mobile IDs. So for the longest time, there has been a conversation, as soon as there was this uprising in the fact that most Americans had smartphones, that mobile identifiers were distinct or distinguished from the way in which we track people in web-based environments. And in most web-based environments to date, and for some short foreseeable future, we've been using cookies. And we use alternative types of identifiers in the mobile space. We use IDFA and AAID based on the Android operating system and the Apple operating system. And there has been complaints about the fact that they lack cohesion and cookie support, but we are actually already continuing to lose those alternative identifiers as well. So that's something else we'll talk about in a little bit. And then finally, what is all this loss connected to? A lot of it has to do with regulation. It's either a reaction to, or it's proactively being done by a series of different tech platforms and invested parties in the larger advertising and digital marketing ecosystem. So these are all things we're going to talk about, but this is a high level to start us off. So a little bit more about cookies for folks that are less familiar with how they work. So what is happening when we are leveraging first or third-party cookies, if those are concepts that are a little bit foreign to you? This all has to do with web-based behavior. So what are things that we can track based on your behaviors that you are taking on any particular site? We want to know what language you prefer to consume content in, which pages you're visiting, how long you're visiting those pages for. Are there specific preferences that you have so that when you go back to the site, those still are intact, so you're having the best user experience that you can? A lot of that behavior that's corresponded with a single site, that type of collection is often happening with first-party cookie collection, meaning that we are looking at it with the intention of ensuring that we're delivering you a quality experience and hopefully like a frictionless or a flawless experience. So you're not trying to figure out, man, what's wrong with this page? Why am I not getting this in the style that I have historically? And a follow-up to that is that there are also these third-party cookies, and the third-party cookies are no longer limited to what's happening on any one brand or company or business's site. Now we're looking to track and see what you're doing beyond the scope of that. And that scope that goes beyond helps us not just reach you with essentially marketing intentions in mind, but rather advertising purposes, so that we can say, where have you been going? What other types of sites are you patroning? How recently did you go there? How long has it been since you went to them? And that can give us an opportunity to create custom audience segments that advertisers want to target against.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in with some quick examples, specifically if you were going to Amazon, I mean, you communicate with Amazon servers. When they send back the page information, it'll also come with those first-party cookies that were placed by Amazon. So that could contain things like your password, so it automatically loads and you log in. Or if you'd previously added something to the cart but didn't actually purchase it, that could come through as well. And so you continue to have those on your next experience when you're going through that checking out process. Where it differentiates from third-party cookies is when Amazon's not the one placing and passing that cookie back to you. For example, if you're on a publisher's site and they use something like AdSense to generate revenue, when they communicate back to send you the page information, third-party server or third-party cookies will be passed as well, which are really coming from Google since they own AdSense. And that will tell Google that you visited this page as well as other pages. And then that can be used as targeting and tracking in the future.
Yeah, it's fantastic clarification. And I think anyone would agree that example that Brandon shared in relation to Amazon, or frankly, any site where you put something in a shopping cart, if you have an intention to go back and see something that you put in a cart, because we don't all make an instantaneous purchase and it was just gone, you'd be frustrated. You're like, what was that thing? Especially on Amazon, a marketplace with, tens of millions of items. Like, I can't remember the brand of that thing. Why is that not still in the cart? And that would be a reflection of the fact that first-party cookies were not activated. And every brand that's in the business of selling or offering some sort of service or commodity wants to be setting up those first-party cookies. And that third-party cookie piece, while there are definitely a ton of benefits that have been used for advertising purposes for well over a decade, well over 15 years now. I mean, I'd say every digital marketer knows so much about third-party cookies and the benefits associated with it. The issue is that the aggregation isn't strictly happening from those good actors who are using it with those direct marketing purposes in mind that correlate with exactly what you want. That collection can also be taking place from people who are leveraging or trying to abuse that data and learn more about you far beyond the scope of what you're intending. So I think there's a lot of good opportunity that we've leveraged for quite some time, but some of these positives have been negated with some of the negatives, and that's a part of the reason why third-party cookies are going away. So let me talk a little bit more about this as far as why are third-party cookies being removed. It sounds like I was just talking about it a moment ago, but here's an expansion on that point. And these expansion points are speaking to something much larger than just some of the points I mentioned a second ago. It's that there has been this movement or an uprising in people demanding that their rights be protected as it relates to their privacy, And they're also being transparency when data is being collected. It's not that everybody doesn't want their data to be collected. It just should be transparent in the event that the data is collected and what is being collected, because that data is yours. And there is this belief of both people who are advocates or individuals browsing the net, and now a lot of politicians, legislative professionals who are saying that this is a consumer right. This is a right associated with privacy, and it's going to fall on marketers to figure out how we are going to better protect you or better provide transparency. And so that is some of the shift in the ecosystem that we're already seeing right now and will continue to see as time goes on. And so that's this final point, really, is that there's going to be an evolution in the way that we all are collecting that data from a marketing perspective. And we're going to talk more about how that is going to transpire in just a moment here. So a little recap of some relatively recent events. These are not all equally recent, but originally Safari and Firefox, and now it's been a series of years since this transpired, they did away with third-party cookie data collection. So you are no longer, if you're using some sort of real-time bidding mechanism like a demand-side platform, you're not going to see cookies being sourced from third-party cookies being sourced from either Safari or Firefox. And there was a lot of heat and concern at the time at which that transpired, but the reason why ultimately people were okay was they're like, "Ooh, we still have a lot of third-party cookies coming through via Google Chrome. We're good." But then in the last couple of years, Google said, actually, we're also getting out of this business, allegedly. And now they're saying that that is going to occur in 2024, which was an announcement that was made just this year. Obviously, there was a lot of heat when they said it was going to transpire in 2023, as we're inching very closely into 2023. Now they're saying it's going to happen back half or end of 2024. So a little bit more leg room, a little bit more time on the runway with third-party cookies, at least for the immediate future. And then, go ahead, Brandon.
I was just going to mention, I do think that legroom is coming from the need to expand and fully develop the privacy sandbox from Google, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But that's also something you'll be hearing more and more about. And this is essentially just a list of rules and ways that we can continue to track via Google Chrome without using third-party cookies, is just implementing several states of this privacy sandbox, which is currently in a bit of a vague state, which is why that is getting pushed out into 2024.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And we'll jump a little bit more into that in just a bit here. One final point, I guess it's technically not a browser, it's an operating system, but tomato, Apple, they also decided that they would not do away, but they would change the way in which identifiers would be collected across mobile devices in May of 2021 with the release of Apple iOS, I believe it was 14.5. Now it's been a while since May of 2021. We're now I think beta or there's soon to be the release of iOS 16. And so it's been a minute, but there's been some impact significantly from a mobile identity standpoint, as far as now requiring opt-ins, as opposed to the past in which it was happening passively without that active ask from you. So talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So this is just a quick mention of that point I made earlier, that when we did away with Safari and Firefox continuing to collect third-party cookies as a default, that was making up less than a quarter of the pie. A quarter is a big slice of the web browsing pie where third-party cookies could otherwise exist, but it just pales in comparison to the fact that ultimately Chrome was all in, right? Google was all in, they were continuing to collect. And at this moment in time, they're continuing to do so. That remaining little dark blue slice of other, that's a reflection of all the other browsers out there. And there's plenty of them, many that are less reputable or less recognized. And admittedly, some of them may have cookies, but again, there's that scaling issue when you're dealing with just a ton of them in there. And then some of them are also in the business of having even more privacy control around them. So they just aren't even serving the purpose of assisting anyone who is concerned from a marketing perspective around continued collection of third-party cookies.
And on this note, I know we've spoken about this concept to some people who are doing cross-domain tracking via Google Analytics. We are not referring to cross-domain tracking when we say cross-site tracking. That will still be widely available. That's because you own those domains. So that is still available and is not going to be affected by this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we say cross-site, I mean, that's really at the crux of when we are saying we're kind of, like, maybe I shouldn't use the word stalking. That just is not a word anybody in the marketing space is going to like, but we're just following you across the internet, right? Like, we're watching what you're doing when you go from site to site. And that's the intent with which we're saying cross-site tracking. So I said I would say a little bit more, expand on that mobile ID erosion piece that we spoke to a couple of slides ago. This is a quick look at Apple's privacy, some of the kind of approach they've taken for their campaigns as far as ushering in information and saying, we're out here looking out for you, the consumer. So this is them saying a little bit about, we want to share transparency. We want to be transparent. Here's some of what we track about you. Here's what can be linked to you. Here's what developers could be collecting in relation to you. And we're just letting you know that this is happening from us, and it happens elsewhere as well. So I think Apple's really put a stake in the ground as far as highlighting themselves as someone, or rather an entity in the tech space and also the advertising technology space, saying that we want to be transparent and we want to give you a little bit more opportunity to control what is or isn't being collected. And here is an expansion of exactly that point. So we mentioned that with iOS 14.5, there was this shift to when we were no longer passively collecting without permission, but requiring rather opt-in. It used to be an opt-out. You'd need to figure out and navigate, oh, how do I no longer have this collected? And that can be cumbersome, burdensome. Now we're seeing more of this, where there is this proactive prompt that's coming to you before data collection can occur. And this is affecting every app in the Apple ecosystem, the iOS ecosystem. So this is a quick pull from that same app privacy page from Apple's site, where they're saying App X would like permission to track you across a multitude of apps and websites. We're doing this so we can serve you personalized ads. And then in this case, they have two different opportunities for you to choose from: allow tracking or ask app not to track. It isn't always positioned exactly like this. In the event that you look at this and you're like, I haven't seen something exactly like this, app developers are in a position to be able to modify exactly how they're communicating those points to you. But they do need to give you options. And in some cases, there might be even more tiers of options. I think the vast majority of consumers are most familiar with location-based asks of saying, before your location is collected, we need to ask you specifically if you will or won't allow it, either all the time, whether you're using the app or not, exclusively when you're using the app, or absolutely never. And they kind of train you on how much the app is going to function relative to what your selection or designation is. And so that might modify or encourage you to select differently. And they're really playing a role in helping you decide which way to go, which is something that I think app developers that want to continue to gather that data absolutely need to do.
And Nora, do you think this is a concept we'll see rolling into like web browsers as well? So not just apps, but I know currently in Europe, and instead of defaulting to collect cookies, you would have to opt out of them, like go into opt in. Is that going to roll over to web browsers in the United States as well, where we have to, serve a prompt if we're going to collect any cookies at all?
In theory, it can. I think from a web browsing perspective, a lot of us, and this is a little bit of a generalization, but I do think the vast majority of us probably use some of these common browsers, whether it is on desktop or it's on web, right? Some people go out of their way, they download the Chrome browser. There could be encouragement to utilize that. But in many instances, if you're an Apple or iOS user, you might be using whatever the default is. So in my case, it's Mozilla Firefox. Safari's app. And in that case, they're already not collecting. So that question isn't being asked. But alternatively, for people who are using, let's say, Android devices, I think that permission could be asked. And I do think actually for many other web browsers, all the ones that are unmentioned or less popular, I think that it boils down to how much are you being incentivized or are you being required to make that shift? Like Apple has a much bigger strategy, like long-term strategy, long game in place for why they're pushing the way that they are. It's not that they've necessarily been dictated to position this type of prompting, but they're really trying to get in the good graces of the, general consumer. And this is a part of getting them to a place where they're like other types of collection might become more permissible. Apple is also getting into the business of developing their own demand side platform, which is going to be another part of their larger tech stack, and specifically an ad tech stack. So they have their own motivations. Could other people have to do this? Absolutely. I think some of them you're going to have to be forced in order for them to be motivated.
Yeah, makes sense.
So this is just a little bit about actual media buying, right? Whether it's programmatic media buying or whatever type of digital media buying, what are some considerations? We're saying that there's going to be all this loss, all this precision marketing, all this precision advertising that we like. What's going to happen to it? So here, I think, are some clarifying points. There inevitably is going to be a loss or a reduction in the availability of identifiers that we use actively now for targeting and measurement when these third-party cookies go away. And that there are some existing types of privacy-safe solutions and or targeting tactics that are on the table that we will be able to continue to use actively, even if suddenly, the switch was flipped and we no longer were able to, leverage third-party cookies at this time. So some examples here include contextual targeting, private marketplace utilization, location-based targeting, which could be on the chopping block too. It hasn't been super actively pursued at this time, but it's a part of the larger precision-oriented tactic system that a lot of advertisers are using, and machine learning optimization, just to mention a couple of tactics. But ultimately, I'm sure a lot of people look at those and they're like, that's not going to make up for search retargeting. That's going to not make up for site retargeting. What about those really precision-oriented tactics that we use? That just can't be replaced. And that's where this final point comes up of saying that there is going to be a responsibility on advertisers and marketers to adopt a portfolio of alternative solutions so that they can make up as much of the groundwork as they can relative to what they were historically able to use with third-party cookies.
And I had spoken with some of the programmatic strategists that we have at Spinutech and asked them to kind of boil down to the key points of what does this mean in layman's terms. And the response was that it's kind of forcing our targeting to be a bit more broader while also having us rely more and more on machine learning in order to target effectively. And when I asked what the keys to the success would be for the machine learning, it became clear that there will be a threshold of spend that's required in order for machine learning to truly learn enough and take over and make your targeting as accurate as possible. So that will affect who's able to play in that space. The little guys might not have the ability to hit that threshold. So that will kind of clear out some competition there. However, those that can afford to hit that threshold will do so, causing that demand for those to go up. So you could potentially see costs increase, and you could also see little guys kind of dropping out of that space.
Yeah, love that point. Unfortunate point, but a point that needs to be made, that there have been a lot of third-party oriented tactics and I'm not trying to limit it to just these players, but Meta, so Facebook and Instagram, a lot of the little guys, so people who maybe a shop of one are setting up some sort of digital marketing entity or organization that it's just them selling something, and they're able to flip a switch where they can historically were able to do that with the types of identifiers that historically were available. A lot of that has already been pulled back on. So there are businesses that have shut down as a result of no longer being able to lean on some of the different types of targeting opportunities that were historically out there. And that is even with third-party cookies continuing to be on the table today. I do think the bigger advertisers that have very heavy spend thresholds are in that better position, to Brandon's point, to leverage some of these alternative options that are on the table. But the other point to mention is that means that the responsibility falls on more first-party data collection, which honestly, again, it's just true. Bigger, larger organizations are in a better position to collect that information or that data over the long term. But if you are in some sort of smaller situation, you're a smaller business or smaller brand, then you need to still figure out, what does that look like for us? How are we going to collect that with permission when we're no longer going to be able to lean on some of these tactics that may put these opportunities on autopilot? So as far as vetting noise from reality, I think anytime that you're in these moments of there's like scary market changes, there's these tectonic shifts that are out there. There are going to be people out there that are trying to prey, again, using some negative language, prey on people's vulnerabilities, but that is just very real. That's something that's happening out in the world. But these are some hard facts that do need to be considered, and I think are clarification that expand on some of what Brandon even mentioned just moments ago. So, one, no identity solution exists that's going to retain the exact same capability as third-party cookies. If you think that there is going to be an alternative option out there that does exactly what third-party cookies do, you're wrong. It's just not going to work that way. And it has a lot to do with, not to jump down, but to the third point, data that is collected without explicit permission shouldn't be collected at all. This entire premise is that you need to be asking, and third-party cookies were not in the business of asking you. So that is a big part of the reason why, if anyone is saying like, this is going to work just as well, like, don't worry about it, you should be very skeptical. One additional point is that these browsers, and this is the browsers, the ecosystems that they give us access to, are stating that they will oppose or block anything that is a privacy violating workaround. So if you're doing some sort of covert tracking, like fingerprinting, like things that are collecting data without that explicit permission, the ecosystem that you are using, that is, you're putting the cookies in, is going to blockade that. So obviously that's not going to work. So you might be being sold some snake oil in the event that someone is saying that they can do what third-party cookies do. And an expansion on those points as far as some alternative identifiers that are out there that are important for the future of a world without third-party cookies, but they cannot be solicited as opportunities that are going to fill the gap when third-party cookies are gone. So first-party cookie data, we spoke about that pretty extensively earlier on when we were talking about the distinctions between what are first-party versus third-party cookies. And first-party cookies, they're tethered to the site, as in the site of the brand or the brand, the advertiser, the business. So, you go to a site like, Spinutech's website. If they have first-party cookies set up, everything lives, is birthed and dies just on the site, in the sense like we're seeing what people are doing here, not what people are doing when they leave. That's what third-party cookies do. So clearly that's not going to be an opportunity for us to observe patterns of behavior as people are patroning and surfing the web. First-party data, actually exceptionally important for the future as an alternative identifier. And it's a big part of the future of this conversation, but it's just harder to collect. So you got to get ready. If you were walking on a sidewalk, now you're trying to scale a mountain. You're getting onto this battle where you need to do heavier work and put your blood, sweat, and tears into asking people for every piece of data that you collect. And then not only do you need to aggregate that data, you need to keep that data clean, you need to segment it, and then figure out how you're going to use it for a series of different marketing purposes. And that is something that is much more of an uphill climb than what people are historically accustomed to, which is let's slap some pixels up and collect some things that have been tried and true for an extended period of time. And after those are no longer good, let's just refresh those cookies, get some new data, and get moving. First-party data is going to be a different ballgame. IP addresses, that's another part of a conversation where people will say, this could be an alternative, these are going to be permissible even in a world in which third-party cookies are not available. And it's not that IP addresses are bad. And I have some mixed beliefs around the point I have listed here, which is that they're not as reliable. That's true. They're not as specific or precise from an attribution perspective, as far as like tracking back to the fact that somebody took some subsequent action related to a very unique identifier. It's just not as precise. And then the secondary point, which is that it's likely to be blocked by CCPA and GDPR. We'll see. We'll see what happens in relation to IP addresses, but it is something that could potentially be targeted as well, just like that mention I made earlier related to location-based targeting. And then finally, fingerprinting, which is a point I made earlier. And there are these types of solution providers out there that are saying, hey, it's going to be the same. I think there are less and less of them as more information becomes available and as more people become informed. But if somebody is offering something that goes against the policies of these browsers and is collecting without permission, you got to ask a lot more questions about the viability of what they're bringing to the table. So this is just a quick look at, let's just have a reality check on what exactly is going to happen in a world in which third-party cookies aren't available.
Yeah, Agreed. And while first party data is obviously not going to fill the gap, which is the point we're making, I think we did state, this is something that you should be pursuing, especially while these third party alternatives are under development. We should still be trying to collect and keep as much first party data as possible. So that could be things like offering value packed content that's gated, offering newsletters, forums, things of that nature that require users with consent to give you information, which you can then keep. I think a lot of that information is just discarded and rarely ever used again, where I think people need to start thinking about the future where those will be much more valuable without third-party cookies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the event that you're already collecting that information and or you already have those types of content opportunities in space, right? There's that value exchange. You're offering something like a newsletter, then let's get on board and start getting that data collection going. It is going to be a slower process. You're not going to be able to aggregate as fast as you would have been with third-party cookies, but it's something to get you moving on this first-party data path. And then alternatively, if you've been neglecting those opportunities, you're not doing anything where you're offering a value exchange, well, you really do have a tough climb as far as putting forth something that's going to get somebody to say yes. And that's an essential part of the process. So as far as some existing and future solutions that are out there, a couple of these I already mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation as far as contextual, machine learning, which Brandon also mentioned, and private marketplaces. These are solutions that are going to be permissible, but of course they are not a perfect swap for third-party cookies. So not that anything is to this point that I've made again and again, but also let's talk a little bit about future solutions. What are solutions that we are praying are going to be on the horizon that will be alternatives to what we are using today? And so there are really two main categories for those future solutions. And one of them is PII-backed identity coalition. So that language sounds like, what the heck is that? PII stands for personally identifiable information, and a coalition is going to be associated with creating this kind of ecosystem or infrastructure where we're able to collect these identifiers in a world that creates a web that is hopefully somewhat similar to third-party cookies, except with permission. So the two big players out there are one is from LiveRamp, and the release, and it's really, I'd say for the most part in some sort of beta stage right now, Ramp ID. And we'll talk more about that. I won't go into the nuances in this moment. And a second solution out there is UID 2.0, which has been talked about ad nauseum, extensively in the trades as far as what's going on with that and how is that going to be a part of the future. We will talk about that. And then secondarily, browser endorsed mechanisms. And browser endorsed, there's only really one browser that we've been talking about that is at the center of so much of this conversation, and that is Google. And I know Brandon also had made a quick inbox earlier. That is really the project or the division of Google that is focused on the future of privacy, but subsequently offering hopefully some solutions that are going to enable us to be cognizant and considerate of people's privacy, while subsequently offering some sort of solution that can be used for marketing purposes. I think my perspective on this has changed a little bit. I wrote it's vague at this point, but working with browsers for a long-term solution, that is true. But in the last just couple of weeks, there have been some updates to Google's Privacy Sandbox project as they're working on furthering exactly what that is going to look like, and also give just marketers in general more visibility into what is happening with Privacy Sandbox, as they are, again, the biggest web browser out there that we're very concerned and or curious about what they're going to offer us next. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
And I would note, I think a lot of people might have heard recently about Google enhanced conversions. That would also fall in this middle column here, where it is requiring the user to be logged into, it could be Gmail, YouTube, any of those Google-owned sites. And then that's how they're able to, obtain that email address or PII. And then they ultimately warehouse that. So if you've heard of that, that is one of Google's responses to the deprecation of third-party cookies, and would kind of qualify as one of those in the middle column there.
Yeah, absolutely. Ongoing developments. The more Google can be involved, kind of the better for all of us, right? Because Google is really at the center of so much of this. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these solutions. I said a moment ago that we would. So Privacy Sandbox isn't exclusively and only comprising of Topics API, but when it comes down to offering some sort of targetable solution for the future of advertising, Topics API is at the center of those conversations. So again, Privacy Sandbox, I'm sure many of you work across the larger suite of Google products out there. This is not the only conversation where we're concerned about sunsetting. I'm sure that's like ringing some bells for many of you. And we don't have enough time to talk about all the different shifts that are happening at Google. That's going to take all day. So we're just going to focus on one of them, which is Topics API. So what is that? They released a press release, I want to say, and it hit the trades out several months ago now. And this is just a little bit about what this solution is and how this is being positioned, not even as an alternative, but it's this offering that's being put in place of, okay, well, what will we offer advertisers when third-party cookies are gone, when we've offered such a robust and really effective suite of solutions for advertisers to date. So here's a little bit about that. Topics API determines or categorizes interests related to a user's week of browsing history without using external or Google servers. So there's this temporary period of time where they are analyzing your browsing behaviors. It's not going to leverage third-party cookies, but it is going to give us visibility into categorizing people more generally, more into these like holistic, looser collections of interest. And then they are very quickly wiped away at a pace that is much faster than the default collection of third-party cookies, which typically on average collection is taking place over 30 days of time. So that's what's being offered. So if you like think about the disparity there, we're going from third-party cookies, which, you know, if you think about like the combinations, the permutations of different variances that could exist with third-party cookies, you could create these custom, richly robust segments relative to behaviors people are taking across the web based on their patronage to different pages on your website. And you're going from that to what was last communicated 60 categories of topics. Like that, there could be hundreds of millions of collections of custom segments to 60. That's what they said last. Google, you want to step up and tell us what you're planning on doing next? I would absolutely love to know, but that was the last I read on it. I know there are some updates hopefully to come with Topics API, but that's what's been discussed publicly to date. Next is LiveRamp's solution. So we mentioned them. We're categorizing this as an addressable solution. And addressable being leveraging a series of different data points together and connecting them to this unique identifier based on what could be a combination of both offline and online first-party data points. So I would say that LiveRamp solution is really the front runner, the horse at the front of the race, but there is a lot of complexity and challenge associated with leveraging this, because what we're saying is it sounds attractive, right? We're going to use all these different data points. Who's going to collect it? You're responsible for collecting and aggregating all of that data, and then they're going to work on matching it. So that is a challenge associated with it. The LiveRamp solution is also not free. So I not that any solution ever is, but there is a price consideration point for advertisers to keep in mind. And you're really going to only figure out what that pricing looks like after you start developing that relationship. So that's another contender out there, and one that's already being used by many advertisers, including like our own clients. And then UID 2.0. So this was originated from the Trade Desk at one point, but then it was taken from there and it was put in the hands of the Interactive Advertising Bureau until a couple of months ago, actually. So now UID 2.0 is kind of a free agent. They're trying to figure out who is going to take on the responsibility of leading UID 2.0 into the future. And the reason why it's in this kind of free agent category is because they're looking for a kind of agnostic party and respected party to make it a solution that is universally accepted, because without that universality or that just overarching utilization, then you can't really create a holistic web that is similar to what cookies otherwise were offering. So that's why there's just been this heavy emphasis on finding this alternative party to lead UID 2.0 into the future. Also, to Brandon's point, and that mention of the fact that Google is working on a solution that requires login-oriented data. This also requires that. So there is this complexity or challenge associated with going to a series of different publisher sites, having login data that you've given permission to have utilized, and then subsequently having that same data be connected all the way back to an eventual conversion, a conversion that is categorized based on the advertiser that's setting up some sort of campaign. So challenges and different complexities across the board relative to what third-party cookies otherwise were offering us. And then finally, CDPs. I don't mention any particular main front runner as it relates to CDPs, because CDPs or customer data platforms, they're used for different purposes. There's a lot of them. Many of them probably need to make modifications to make CDPs more attractive for advertising purposes so that they are more turnkey for their utilization. But what are they in the event that you're like, what the heck are CDPs? This is just a little bit about them. They ingest, unify, and store disparate data sources, and they are not to date being exclusively used with marketing or advertising purposes in mind. A lot of that data collection could be used for broader business or operational purposes. And CDPs are used, I'd say, like Fortune 1000, like the biggest businesses in the world, they're all using CDPs because it's essential for the running of their businesses. But realizing that all this data is being aggregated, what of that data that we are asking permission for data with could we siphon off and now leverage for this segmentation, now that we're moving into a world where that type of consideration and collection will be required in order for us to be successful in a world without third-party cookies. So much more to come as far as some of these CDPs being leveraged in the space, but there are definitely advertisers out there or brands that are making CDPs a priority for the future without cookies. And a couple of quick checkpoints over here in terms of if you're going to engage with anybody that's offering a cookieless solution, because it's not just these folks out there. There are many providers out there that are offering some sort of solution in the space saying like, hey, we've got something for you for the future that doesn't have cookies. So what types of questions do you want to be asking in the event that you are going to be engaging in that dialogue yourself? So here are a couple of just baseline questions you want to make sure you're putting out there. One, scalability. How many identifiers are available in the bid stream relative to an audience that you want to reach? How are they able to even take that question? How will they answer it? Getting some background on that. What is that potential opportunity for you to reach who you want to reach, right? That's a fair question. Secondarily, accessibility. Is your offering available for testing today? If it's not available, it's like a hypothetical. And that is actually a part of some of these conversations that we're talking about, right? Like Topics API. Who's used Topics API in this phone call? I know I can't see you, but you can't raise your hand because it's not openly available. So that's one of the challenges, is making sure that in the event that something is available, ask them, what are the steps that are going to be required for us to launch something so we can leverage this opportunity that you're making, hoping to make available to us. And in that similar vein is compatibility. If you are on this call, there's a good likelihood that leveraging digital marketing or paid media is central to you executing digital media campaigns. And that means that you have things that you're already using, and perhaps that includes a tech stack. So how will what they offer plug into your existing integrations or tech stack that you're leveraging? And, as we continuously move into the future, more and more advertisers are making it their bread and butter of having that tech stack in place. So figuring out how do we both leverage more of those things that we can use personally and make sure that anything that we bring along can be compatible with that is key. Then compliance. This entire conversation is predicated on the fact that this consumer privacy needs to be at the forefront. Whether it's just us like jumping on the bandwagon, which is not the case. People want to follow what the law is going to demand and what these regulations are expecting people to uphold. So what best practices are being put in place to ensure that what they're offering is going to ensure that you are also upholding the law. So asking that question. And then finally, investment. And that's something I hinted at a little bit earlier too, is that are the budgetary requirements that are expected to leverage your solution something that falls within the scope of what the client that we are working with is open to leveraging, because it's not going to be probably offered on the same kind of like CPM basis that a lot of advertisers are accustomed to, just like, oh, let's just, add on this, third-party data set. We're going to add an extra 50 cents here, an extra $1.50 onto the CPM. It's being priced very differently. And it's not that easy to come to that conclusion of like, what's that line item cost looking like? So you got to do a lot of legwork to figure out what that pricing looks like. And then the second piece that also is associated with investment is the investment of skilled labor. Who is going to be responsible for taking on this work? And some of that could be, media strategists, media buyers, people who work on the analytics team. But in some instances, if you're leveraging a CDP, which is one of the types of solutions we talked about, you may not have people internally who are equipped to work on that type of technology, especially if you want to use it for the full scope that it could potentially be leveraged. There may also be, additional parties that you need to hire on to leverage those types of solutions. There's going to be a lot of integrated work that needs to happen. So figuring out what does that dynamic look like, and will you be able to leverage that solution based on the hiring that you have in place? So those are some just baseline questions to make sure you're putting out there, but there are definitely additional questions relative to the business that you're working on that you want to be asking. So finally, whenever I have these types of conversations, it may sound like, man, it sounds like there's a lot of negatives. Got a lot of negatives out there. It's not sounding super rosy. That's not true. I think it's more about the vagueness of these times and being realistic about what's happening, because I oftentimes will not say it's about the cookieless future. I'll say that we're in this like cookieless purgatory. We kind of don't know exactly when this future is going to strike, because we continue to live kind of in fear of when we're going to suddenly have this loss. But then we keep getting reassured that we have a little bit more time. No, you actually have a little bit more time. And that's because really Google is still trying to put the pieces together as far as what this is going to look like, because I don't think anybody's surprised. Google's making a lot of money, to put it lightly, on the back of offering these kinds of solutions that all of us, every person on the phone, every person working in this business is leveraging. So there are some things that we have to wait on. That's the tricky part of this conversation. But as far as, for instance, like one thing that we're doing, and I know many different types of, solution providers are offering and working on different types of solutions. Like we in particular at Basis, we're working on cookieless conversion attribution, and tracking and attribution is something we did not talk about a lot in this conversation. I know we're getting close to time over here. So just a quick mention that attribution is a big piece of this too. How do you connect that to the fact that somebody actually converted and took on that indicator that correlates with some sort of impression that you served to them earlier? That's something that we're working on. Subsequently, expanding the different types of alternatives for both targeting and reporting. How do we make sure that we continue to get reporting that's going to be valuable to advertisers once third-party cookies are gone? And then these two final points have to do more with observation, like what is going to be the finalization of some of these different solutions from UID 2.0, from LiveRamp, from Google, because those are going to be hopefully part of universal solutions that every person on the phone is going to be using in the future once third-party cookies are gone. And then finally, all the things that are hopefully going to become available from browser developments. And the browsers, again, like cookies exist because of browsers. If it weren't for all of our browsing behaviors, none of these solutions would exist. So we really need to wait to see what is available. And when information is available, that's a part of what I do. It's my business to figure out how do we make sure that we're staying on top of iterative updates that actually have value or mean something to advertisers and brands. So I know, again, it's sounding pretty vague at the moment, somewhat nebulous, but that's why I think I have this final point over here. How will change, but the fundamentals of online advertising will not. Look, every Sunday, iOS tells me, Noor, you've spent like 7 hours a day on your phone, and maybe that's embarrassing, but also it says something about the potential for me to continue to work in this business, right? I'm spending this like awful amount of time consuming content on the internet, and or for other more legitimate purposes. And that's why I think we know that things will not be the same, but that as long as people are spending a lot of time on screens, that there are going to be shifts or waves that occur as far as how we engage with consumers, but we will continue engaging with them. So that's all I've got for you guys today.
Fantastic. Noor, thank you. I have zero doubt in my mind that what you are consuming on your screens and what I am consuming are two wildly different things. I am looking at golf content and degenerate gambling things. You're looking at things that make you more intelligent. So thank you for that piece. Okay, in the interest of time, I know we threw a lot at you today. There's a lot to just kind of soak in. And even to Nora's point, I think that there might be some additional conversation that may come of this. So I will offer this up. If you have questions that we weren't able to get to today, or maybe that you haven't even had a chance to really kind of marinate on quite yet, you can submit any questions you have to webinar@spinutech.com. We will actually get that socialized. Nora's only an email/phone call away. We look forward to kind of diving into some of those. But in the interest of time, we'll kind of wrap this thing up. Special thank you, Nor. Thank you very much. Appreciate your insight. Obviously, your experience. It's always a pleasure to share the screen in the room with you. Brandon, you were also pretty good. So appreciate you. Appreciate you leading us here. Again, Basis Technologies, we appreciate you making Nor available and look forward to the next one. That being said, for Spinutech, our next webinar is coming up. We're going to spend a little bit of time wrapping up the year. We're going to talk about company culture a little bit, and it's going to feature our CEO, Mark Reifenrath. That will be on December 14th. He'll dive into some of the nuances there. If you have not heard him speak specifically about culture and kind of our unique take on it, I would suggest taking a look at that. It's something that we're super proud of and is part of the DNA here at Spinutech.